Hey church family, hope this video finds you well. Tonight we're looking at the life of Abraham and his running the race of faith and what that looked like for him. And my hope and my prayer is that by looking at his life and his experiences of receiving God's promises and trying to live by them, we might also be encouraged. So let's start off just by looking in Genesis chapter 12 at the nature of that promise that God gave to Abraham. Now the Lord had said to Abraham, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So there's just like three really core points that I want to just pull out of there for us. So one is like the nature of the call for Abraham to go from his country and go to the land that God will show to him. And then the second is God gives a promise for the future and for the fulfillment in the future. And it says, "I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. You will be a blessing. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So there's this sense of call to action. There's this sense of like future promise of what will result from Abraham's faith. And then finally, God also in the middle of that, in the beginning of verse 3, promises, "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse." So there's this sense of like God kind of promising his protection to Abraham in the midst of him following and in the midst of him pursuing, being obedient to God's call and having faith in God's promises. So what I thought would be really just fruitful to reflect on for us is kind of to approach this, so we've got this idea of what Abraham's call and the promise that Abraham received was, but how did he respond to that and how did he live in light of that? In one way in which he failed to live in light of that, but then also in an overall sense, when we move on to Hebrews chapter 11, what it meant for him to, in the bigger sense, be obedient to that call and to have that faith. So just back in Genesis 12, briefly, a little bit further down from where we read the promise and read the call that God gave to Abraham. In verse 10 we read this: "Now there was a famine in the land, and Abraham went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was so severe." So by this point, Abraham's already traveled. He's already left his father's house. He's already gathered all his belongings, and he's traveled to the land that God is going to give him. He follows God's call, he goes to the land, and then suddenly there's a famine. I don't want to project myself or my own experiences into those of Abraham, but I don't think it would be too far a stretch of the imagination to say that he would be potentially quite confused by this. To receive such a dramatic call and to enter this land that God has promised to give him and his descendants, and he's not made into a king. Doesn't suddenly take possession of the whole land by some great miracle. Instead, there's a famine and he has to leave. And continuing on with the reading, verse 11, "As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, 'I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, "This is his wife." Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you.'" So just imagine what that would be like for you. You've followed God's promise, you've gone to this land, it's not at all worked out how you expected, and you've had to leave. Maybe you feel confused, maybe Abraham felt vulnerable, but whatever the motivations were, he was definitely entering Egypt with a sense of fear. He wasn't entering Egypt with a sense of knowing the promise that God had given him. Specifically, "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse." The sense of ongoing protection from the Lord. He fears for his life, and he doesn't put his trust in God. He doesn't put his trust in the promise that God has given him specifically. Instead, he says to his wife, "Lie, pretend you're my sister, and then my life will be spared because of you." And I think just one really simple reflection for us is that we might know God's promises, the promise that he will never leave us or forsake us, the promise that he is preparing a place for us, that the only thing that lasts is the only thing that matters is when we have faith, and that expresses itself through love. All these different things throughout scripture that we learn, but the second that we feel vulnerable, the second that we feel that life is not going as it should, that it's out of control somehow and not what we expect, the temptation is for us to forget the promises of God, forget the things that we can't see, and only instead focus on what we can see. How am I going to fix this situation? How am I going to maneuver and manipulate and lie and do all these things to preserve myself and to protect myself? And I think if we're honest, we can all, every single one of us, see seasons in our lives, days, weeks, where we've been primarily operating out of that frame of reference and that frame of mind. And I don't say this to bring condemnation or to bring shame on us, but it is helpful for us to reflect when life goes quote unquote wrong. The temptation is to take our eyes off of the promises God has given us and the character and nature of God, and to fix our eyes only on what can I do, what can I achieve, how can I fix this situation. And obviously we're not called to live in the light of simply and only what's in front of us, but also in a much greater way in the light of what is ahead of us, in the restoration of all things. That sense, that knowledge that one day we will be with God and He will dwell with us, and we will be His people forever, and that we will be fully welcomed in, that we will every tear wiped away, and all these things. And when it comes down to the here and now, the power that can give us to live out of a sense of faith and not out of a sense of fear is really, really important. And I just think, of Jake sharing about generosity a few weeks ago in church, and that the knowledge that our treasure is in heaven and not on earth, and that anything here will spoil and fade, but whatever is done for God and out of a love and devotion to God and out of a thankfulness to God is what lasts forever. That gives you almost like a great superpower to be generous in a way that this world can't be generous. Not just to be a good person, but to do things that only make sense in the light of eternity. Now, in case you're feeling a little bit, looking back and remembering those times where you have lived and responded out of a sense of fear, out of a sense of a need to control your environment. Believe me, I know what that's like. I think it'd be really helpful for us now to switch over and look at God's perspective on Abraham's life, and see how it's described in Hebrews 11. So, reading from Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to a city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and countless as the sand on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had the opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. And just two really simple takeaways from that. One, that even in the light of all of Abraham's up and downs and his obedience and his disobedience and his moral failures and his successful moments and his encounters with God, still he stayed in the land. Still he ultimately pursued and held on to that promise that God gave. And secondly, not only did they persevere, but also they never received the specific thing that God had promised them, namely receiving the land. Not Abraham, not Abraham's child, his children's children. all, down through generations, and even through into ending up in slavery in Egypt before they actually received that promise and became the people um, that God had promised to make his descendants into. And even with Abraham's ups and downs in terms of obedience, and the mistakes that he makes, and the sin that he commits, and the ways that he wanders away from what God was leading him into and the promises that God had made to him, still ultimately his hope and his faith was set on that promise that God had given him. And I just think that that's maybe a good encouragement for us in all of our daily wanderings, and in our daily the ebb and flow of our affections for God and our desire for his kingdom. God is able to hold us and to keep us in that pursuit of his promises, in the pursuit of his kingdom. There's more that I would love to share with you guys, but the kids are calling. So much love to you all, and I hope that you have a fruitful discussion from all this. Blessings.